What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto x Athena Saint Seiya? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Be exiled from this world. The Greek gods finished. The 7 gold saints and the 1 bronze saint stood at the middle of the room, wondering what was going to happen next. Mew and Shaka were simply waiting calmly for what was going to happen, though Shaka had no idea what he did to end up in the same boat as the others. He attributed it to the fact that he badgered the other 3 into using the Athena's exclamation. Miro was chewing on his lip, Ioria was tapping his foot, Camus was trying to resist the urge to pace, Saga was calm outwardly. Inwardly he was about as nervous as everyone else. Shura had his arms folded, and was drumming his fingers on his arm. The lone bronze saint, Shiryu, was looking between the gold saints, and wondering why he wasn't more worried than he was. The next thing that happened was a surprise to the group, as the ground they were standing on glowed, and with a bright flash of light they saw the others disappear, and felt themselves vanish from their home. Mew sat up, rubbing his head, and wondering why it hurt. Looking around he figured that it hurt because he fell from heights that many people would definitely consider damaging. He groaned as he got back to his feet, swaying slightly. He shook his head and rebalanced himself, even as the world continued to spin in such a way as to make him feel ill. Now, where am I? He muttered as he began walking, but stopped as he realized something. He wasn't wearing his gold cloth. Instead he was wearing what he wore when he was in Jameer. He sighed, but continued moving. Then something flew past his face, causing him to stop and look around. "Who are you?" A voice called out, and he looked around for the source. He turned to face the owner of the voice, and the thrown weapon. "I am Ares Mew," he responded, as he waited for the other to come out of hiding, now that he had found him. Didn't he know that he could track people by their cosmos? And this one had something odd going on with his left side, most likely his eye. He also felt 2 other cosmos, wait. 3. One had another inside him, now that was odd. He blinked, as he scanned the area again. He could tell where each one of them was, and he had felt a familiar cosmo, an icy one, heading their way. Possibly only because he was the only familiar cosmo within a close range. Then again Camus was not going to be happy with the situation. But Camus wasn't the one who had a sharp pointy thing fly past his nose. If anything, Mew should have been the one angry, but he wasn't known as a pacifist for nothing. It took quite a bit to make him angry. "We are Konoha shinobi. What are you doing here, within Konoha's boundaries?" the voice asked, not moving from the place where he sat, even as Mew stared steadily in his direction. "Kakashi-sensei, he's staring at you," Naruto commented, in a low voice, and Sakura nodded. That person Mew was disturbing. She didn't know what the person's gender was. After all, Mew was wearing baggy clothes, and the voice, well, it wasn't any help. Any person around the ages of 14 or so would sound like that. Yep. Goldies are now around the ages of the genin of Naruto, and I really didn't pay much attention when it came to when voices change. They had pale lilac, extremely long hair, and blue-green eyes, and had little more eyebrow than Gaara. Yet they didn't seem to be any type of threat. They hadn't attacked, hadn't lied, and was simply standing there. But they had to be skilled in some area, as they knew where she and her 2 teammates were. "I am lost. I apologize for trespassing, but I don't know where I am, and I am looking for my friends," Mew responded, shaking Sakura out of her thoughts. Mew sighed. He really had no idea where this Konoha was. He guessed it was part of the world the gods had exiled him and his fellow saints to. He could tell that Camus was approaching faster now. He must have felt the others that were nearby Mew. He blinked a few times when said Aquarius Saint came crashing through the underbrush in long pants and a shirt with torn-off sleeves, all various faded shades of blue, matching his hair and eyes, and glaring. He felt the 3 that were still hiding shift their attention to Camus, and also caught the ice user glaring up in their direction. The Ares Saint coughed as he noticed that Camus looked shorter. Oh dear, that did not bode well. Still, that would explain why he didn't sound like himself. He put a hand on Camus' arm, and gave him a look that simply asked him to hold his temper. That was about when the 3 figures jumped out of the tree, revealing themselves to the 2 saints. Though all 3 had a knife-like weapon out. "Who's he?" the silver-haired man asked, and Camus growled. Mew patted his arm, trying to get him to calm down again, before he used the Aurora Executioner on them. That would not have been pretty. And Milo would have his head if he let Camus end up in trouble. Camus, calm down, we're the ones trespassing. Mew reminded the Aquarius Saint. Camus gave him a withering look, and Mew shrugged. This would be my friend. Aquarius Camus. Mew responded, and felt his friend's glare turn deadly. I could have introduced myself, the saint grumbled mentally. Mew chose to ignore that comment. Though he did turn in the direction of the other Cosmo he felt approaching. Shaka, this time. And no sooner did he think of that did the blonde India native show up. Mew? Camus? What is going on? Once again Kakashi, Naruto, and Sakura turned to stare at the newcomer. It was an even weirder sight as the man was dressed in robes, holding prayer beads, and had managed to navigate the underbrush without making any noise, with his eyes closed. Sakura was sure that her day could get no weirder. That was until the long-haired blonde showed up. How the hell did he manage that? She was sure she was twitching almost as badly as Naruto at the moment. Shaka? It seems we are trespassing. Camus replied, with another look over to the lilac-haired person, who once again looked like they didn't hear the other. You know we still have to find the other 4? Camus said, and it was Emu's turn to give the ice user a funny look. 4? Don't you mean 5? He asked, and Camus shrugged. I figured that Saga can handle himself. Was the reply, and Mew sighed, but didn't answer. He was just glad that his friend hadn't addled his brains from sitting out in the freezing cold for too long. Then again, what Camus considered cold and what the Jameer native considered cold were two different things. Now, if you'll excuse us, we still have 4, Camus began to say, before Mew cut in. 5, Camus, Saga still counts. Camus glared, and the Tibetan returned the stare. Shaka sighed, and wondered how he had ended up in the same group as them. Mew, how hard did you hit your head? The ice user asked, a mild tone of annoyance in his voice. Mew didn't respond, already knowing what Camus would say to his drop from a tree. Well, we have 5 people still missing, so, we'll be on our way. Mew said. By now the 3 shinobi were wondering what was going on. Hold it, you are still unnamed, and do not look like you even belong here. Sakura snapped, finally frustrated beyond her limits. HMN? Our names? We gave them to you already. Mew, Camus and Shaka. Mew replied, as they pointed to each in turn. Sakura and Naruto turned to their sensei, who was merely looking between the 3 with a bit of interest. Something about the 3 told him that they would definitely be a problem to take on if they actually came to blows. It probably had to do with the easy confidence that they held themselves with, something that a warrior that was sure of their own power would do, unconsciously. So, exactly who are you looking for? He asked, and Naruto and Sakura had to stop themselves before they fell over in shock. The other 3 didn't seem to notice that. HMN, he wants to help, should we let him? Mew asked, and the other 2 were silent for a few seconds. Shaka was the one who replied. He probably only wants to help so as to keep an eye on us. But if he is native here he could help us find our way around. The Virgo Saint answered, and looked over to the psychic, and then to the ice user. Both nodded, and Shaka spoke again, this time so the silver-haired man and his 2 teammates could hear him. We would be looking for 5 individuals. Saga, Shira, Miro, Ioria and Shiryu. Shaka responded, and the 3 shinobi blinked, and then started as the 3 began moving off. Hey, get back here, the blonde boy shouted, as he marched up to them. He received a mild glare from Camus, and a sigh from Shaka, but no more. They really didn't have the patience to deal with him. Well, maybe Mew did, but he had practice with kids. Mew turned back to the group, and stared at the blonde. If you wish to help, then I suggest you follow. We already have an idea where the others are, and we do not feel like waiting around. Mew remarked, and turned back to follow the group. The spiky-haired blonde growled, and stomped after the 3. The other 2 followed after them, a bit less aggravated than the blonde. After a few minutes walk they heard something rustling up in one of the trees, and then a familiar voice. Hey guys, a voice said, and when they looked up, they saw Ioria sitting up in a tree. He waved at them, and the 3 saints on the ground stared or, in Shaka's case, shook their head. Ioria, get down here. Wait, how did you get up there in the first place? Mew asked, as him Camus and Shaka stared up at the Leo Saint. Ioria shrugged before answering. How else? I climbed. he replied with a smirk. Shaka twitched, Camus drew his fist back, and Mew sighed, before he placed both hands on his two friends, and gripped their shoulders. "Calm down, the both of you," he said, before turning his attention to the other three that had followed them. He could also tell that Ioria was waiting for them to introduce themselves. "Ioria, get down. This would be, defenders of Konoha?" Mew said, and looked over his shoulder to the three mentioned, as Ioria jumped from the tree and landed heavily on the ground. "I'm guessing you didn't get names, did you?" Ioria asked, giving his three friends a look. The two that Mew was still holding onto merely glared at the Leo Saint, and Mew was tempted to let go of them. Ioria grinned weakly, and rubbed the back of his head. "Hey, what's it with you four?" The blonde cut in, now annoyed. He could tell that they were communicating, but he just didn't know how they were. The other two were likewise stumped. "HMN? Well, maybe we'll talk a bit more once we get some names." The Leo Saint responded, and the blonde and pink-haired girl looked over to the silver-haired man, as if asking what they should do. "They seem harmless enough," Shaka said, and got minute nods from the others. Kakashi watched the group of people in front of him. The newest one they had met was dressed in a leather vest, over a short-sleeved top, and loose-fitted pants, held to his legs by a pair of boots. He had gold-brown hair and green eyes, and seemed to be the younger of the group, or at least the more impulsive. Naruto was twitching madly after the man, Ioria, had more or less demanded their names. Still, Kakashi decided to at least give in to that demand, if it meant they would talk a bit more freely. Maybe that way they could learn where the strangers came from. "I'm Kakashi, that's Naruto, and that's Sakura," Kakashi said, with his traditional smile. For a few seconds the four simply stared at him, not exactly believing that the man had actually given them their names. Sakura and Naruto were likewise shocked. But then they all snapped their attention in a single direction, and the shinobi heard someone crashing through the underbrush again. Only this time it was accompanied by very colorful curses. "Miro, there you are," Ioria called, and Miro stopped cursing, and looked up from his torn pants and shirt. "There you guys are. Where are the others?" he asked, ignoring the two slack-jawed shinobi. Kakashi was simply looking between them with an amused expression. This man was dressed similar to the others, and had long hair similar to the other four excluding Ioria. But unlike Shaka and Mew, his hair looked like it had never seen a comb or brush. "Still wandering around. Still missing Saga, Shira, and Shiryu," Mew replied in an easy tone, and Miro nodded. Kakashi was interested in how these people worked together, after all their personalities were as diverse as the clothing they wore. But his musings were cut short by a loud bang, and the saints all turned in a certain direction, before taking off. "That was Saga and Shira. I think they may have gotten into trouble," Mew said, as they ran, and Ioria nodded, as did Camus and Milo. Shaka only chuckled. "Don't you mean that whoever bothered them got into trouble?" the Indian native asked, a faint tint of humor in his voice. Milo almost tripped, and Mew shook his head. "Well, it was Saga and Shira they were talking about. I feel sorry for whoever annoyed them enough to have Saga use his Galaxian explosion on them," he said, as they got closer to the area, and noted a few cuts in the trunks of the trees around them. "Or the poor fool who had Shira's Excalibur used on them," Ioria commented, after seeing the damage getting worse. Kakashi had been amazed at how fast some of them could move. After all, they were having a hard time keeping up with the newcomers, and they were shinobi for Kami-san's sake. He noted that they were still able to talk to one another, as they were looking between themselves. Kakashi also noticed that there was damage in the area, like someone had been through the area with a sword. As they went further, he began to notice the damage was becoming worse. But that only seemed to spur the five onwards. Some looked downright happy. That scared Kakashi slightly. "We're getting closer," Ioria called, as he noted a felled tree that looked as if a very sharp object cut it down. "We've noticed," Miro commented dryly. Ioria glared. Shaka and Mew sighed, and Camus simply shook his head. "Calm down, you two," Mew reprimanded them, and then stopped short, and dove towards the side. He was copied by the others. The trees behind them split, and fell into pieces. "Shira, you moron, it's us," Ioria hollered, as soon as he scrambled back to his feet. Shira walked out from behind the trees, and was followed by Saga, who shrugged. One can never be too careful when in unfamiliar territory. The Capricorn saint replied, and Ioria twitched. Don't talk to me like that. You stupid rock goat. The Leo saint snapped. Take that back, you oversized housecat. The Capricorn saint snapped back. The other saints sighed and waited for one of them to lose their temper and do something stupid. Mew had actually begun counting to see how long they lasted. 9, 10, LA, and that was about when Shira finally lost his temper and attacked, swinging at Ioria's head. Ioria retaliated with a punch aimed for the stomach. After seeing them take a few more swings at each other, Saga sighed. He was not pleased by how childish they were acting. Knock it off, the both of you. Or I will finish the fight for you. He grumbled, and that brought an immediate halt to their fight. Only then did he turn to Kakashi and the two genin. Ah, I guess you are also shinobi, also from Konoha I gather? He said, as he looked over at them, noting the headbands. Mew and the others stared. How the hell do you know that? Ioria demanded. Saga pointed off to the side. Now that it was quieter, they could hear muffled cursing. Kakashi's one visible eye widened. He recognized the voice, though muffled. There was no mistaking that string of curses coming from the Uchiha. He and the others peered around the two to find that one of the two had a very odd version of capture. Sasuke had been gagged, bound hand and foot, and hung by his ankles from a tree. By the wire he had used to set up the traps around the camp. Naruto was snickering, and Sakura looked horrified. Kakashi was his normal, outwardly calm self as he surveyed the situation. 7. Virtually unknown, people had somehow gotten into Konoha's boundaries, and seemed to have the ability to talk between each other telepathically, and pinpoint others by some means, and they didn't look any older than genin. Not to mention that the two that they had just found had taken down Sasuke. Their potential if trained was scary. He already knew one thing: he wasn't going to let them wander around so they could be caught by sound. That would be disastrous. Now, how to persuade them to come back to the city and to convince Tsunade and the others that they were better off in Konoha? And how to convince Sasuke not to attack them once he was let free? You, new person, short hair, do you mind letting my student go? Kakashi asked, pointing at the one closest to the Uchiha. Said male blinked and raised an eyebrow. Fine, and the name is Shira. Shira grumbled as he drew back his arm and snapped it down in a slicing motion. The wire and branch that had kept Sasuke up was suddenly cut, and the Uchiha plummeted to the ground. Sasuke hit the ground, as did the branch. Thankfully the branch didn't land on Sasuke, and only next to him. The Uchiha pulled himself off the ground, and glared over at Shira, who was now talking to Ioria. Sasuke continued to glare, and walked over to his sensei, definitely in a foul mood. Man, this is not what I had in mind. Shira grumbled, and Ioria nodded. When the gods had said exiled, they had all thought it meant death, true death. But this? Not even a thought of this. Well, now the only person that is still missing is Shiryu, and I can't sense his Cosmo anywhere around here. Ioria said, and Shira nodded in agreement. He had also been unable to find the Bronze Saint. Come on, we have a deadline on our mission, and if we do not return, Hokage-sama will send others after us. Kakashi broke in, and the 7 saints turned to glare in his direction. Kakashi had been a bit taken aback at the reaction of the 7, but he didn't let it show. Now, Naruto, he had backed up a foot, as had Sakura. They could practically feel the anger rolling off them. We'll look for him later. I'll even ask for her to assign a team to it. Now, we need to get back to Konoha. Kakashi said, under the glares from some of the people gathered there. After the 7 exchanged a few glances with each other, Mew finally spoke up. Fine, but if anyone goes looking for him, we want at least 2 of our 7 to go along. Kakashi nodded, already knowing that trying to argue would result in a very sticky situation. And as soon as Kakashi knew that they had come to an agreement, he was back in the trees, followed by his 3 students. The other 7 people remained on the ground, waiting for the shinobi to lead the way. Kakashi blinked before setting off. He noted that the people seemed to be able to move just as fast or faster than most shinobi on the ground. Now, that was another question: were they foreign shinobi or just well-trained citizens? That and the other questions would just have to be answered when they got to Konoha. Shiryu twisted in the air so he landed on his hands and feet like a cat, as he felt himself tumble out of a tree. After landing, he looked around, as he noted he was in a forest, with trees large enough that they could serve as a zodiac temple's pillar. And those were the smaller ones. He looked around, before noting another something odd. He was back in his kung fu suit, that purple thing with sleeves. But why, and what happened? Oh, right, he and 7 of the Gold Saints had been banished for using a forbidden move, though how Shaka had gotten involved confused him. He knew he, himself, had been punished because he had joined Mew, Milo, and Ioria against Saga, Camus, and Shira. Though it obviously wasn't enough to get him into any more trouble than just being exiled, as his memory, body, senses, and cosmos were still intact. He could only imagine what had happened to the others. Right, time to get moving, he said aloud, more than anything to just hear something. He had wandered a few paces in before noticing something else odd. Silence. It was too silent for a forest this size. Even the birds had gone quiet. He knew that was unnatural. The forests where he trained had never been that quiet, so he flared his cosmos slightly, channeling it all into his arm that had Excalibur placed in it by Shira. He knew someone was nearby, 4 actually. And they had stopped moving as soon as he had begun moving. It seemed he had a few admirers who decided to watch him. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure not to turn his head, and noted something move slightly in the trees. So, they were going to follow him? Well, he wasn't too sure about their intentions, though 3 of the 4 were curious from the feel of their cosmos. The other one, that one was suspicious and hostile. He walked forwards a few more paces, in a different direction, and found that they 4 other cosmos also followed. So, time to see who was tailing him. Excalibur, he shouted as he whirled around, snapping his arm out as he twisted, slicing through the trunks of the trees that the 4 were in. He heard a few shouts, and saw a few blurs move to different trees. He also noted that they weren't so curious now that he had attacked, proving that he was hostile. He had made them mad. Okay, that didn't work, he thought, as he closed his eyes, listening for the slightest sound that would give them away. He dove out of the way of a few oncoming objects, and quickly rolled to his feet. Though he was soon dodging a flurry of attacks from a person in green. He wasn't as fast as Seiya, but still, he didn't want to get hurt, and the last time he and Seiya fought, Seiya won. Not a very comforting thought. He jumped back, just in time to avoid another oncoming object barrage. It seemed that whoever was in the trees had an almost endless supply of sharp pointy things. And was intent on using Shiryu as target practice. He was not too happy with the situation now, but then another Cosmo came up from behind, and he whirled around just in time to deliver a punch to the person's stomach. That person flew and skidded to a stop, before trying to regain his feet. Then the person in green went after him again, and once again he resorted to dodging, while looking for an opening. Once he found it, he swung, his foot connecting solidly with the person's side. And now the barrage of weapons, again. And the 2 he had knocked over were getting back up. This was getting tedious. Then again, this was what the Gold and Silver Saints, and the Spectres, must have thought about him: Seiya, Hyoga, Shun and Ikki. Tedious, and a pain in the oops, no time to get distracted. He twisted to avoid the punch of one, ducked another thrown object, but the person who he had gut-punched connected with his right shoulder. When Shiryu tried to move it again, he found that it was immobile. Not good, he thought, as he tried to force his Cosmo into that limb, with no success. He gripped his shoulder, and glared at the long-haired brunette who was giving him a smug smile. Yosh, good job, Neji, the person in green said, as the brunette nodded. Then a girl jumped out of the tree, a handful of more pointy objects in her hands, with a wicked grin. Now he knew he was in over his head. Though he was a saint, even if he was banished, and he wasn't going to give up that easily. He brought up his left arm in the best guard position he could manage in that state. But before any of the 3 in front of him decided to attack, his heart decided to act up. It had been stopped, and restarted, by Seiya, impaled by Shira, shocked by Poseidon, and now stressed by the amount of work his martial arts took. He was just surprised it hadn't acted up earlier. He collapsed to his knees, coughing up blood, his right arm useless and his left supporting him. Neji blinked in surprise as the person crumpled, coughing blood. He hadn't hit the heart. Hell, he had hit the opposite side. And he hadn't been hit by Lee or Tenten. Guy jumped out of the tree, as he saw the young teen cough blood, worried now. While the teen may have been an enemy, he didn't have the same feel as an enemy shinobi, and when they had first seen him he had looked confused. Hell, if he was going to Konoha he was going in the wrong direction. And he sure wasn't coming from Konoha, or he'd be moving faster than that. Maybe he was simply lost, and he had attacked only out of fear, not aggression. Guy crouched down, seized the teen's shoulders and forced him to sit up so he was looking at him. The person tried to swat his hands off with his one good one, but by now was too weak to do much. "Get off me," the boy wheezed, his eyes tightly closed, and his face twisted into one of pain. That worried Guy, as that was normally never a good sign. They were close to Konoha, but close enough? Guy hoped so, as he picked the boy up despite his protests. Though a few hand seals later the boy was out cold. He hadn't known that the jutsu for forced sleep would come in useful until now. "Guy-sensei?" Lee's curious tone and question told him that he would have to explain, and not just for Lee. He's not a shinobi, but has some type of power. Though he also seems to have a medical condition. "We're going to have to get back to Konoha fast," he replied, serious as ever. Neji, Lee, and Tenten were used to the changes by now, and simply nodded, and took off after their sensei. Mew stopped so suddenly that Milo, who was behind him, crashed into him. "Mew, what the hell?" the Scorpio Saint demanded, as he got back up rubbing his head. Mew also had to regain his feet, and gave Milo a reproachful look. The others had stopped, once they heard Milo's loud voice. "Shiryu, he's around here, or was. I can't feel him anymore," Mew said, once he got back up, and dusted himself off. He was worried and had to do something to distract himself. "Eh? So that was his Cosmo early, oh shit," Milo said, once the information sank in. If his Cosmo went out, that normally meant Dragon had either been killed, or knocked out. And he highly doubted that Shiryu would let himself get knocked out. And from the mummers from the others they thought the same. Though he hoped that Shiryu had simply passed out, and they would be able to find him. "Nay, Mew, right? What's up?" the silver-haired man asked, as he jumped down to land near the Saints. Mew shrugged. "I don't think he has to know. We'll get out later to check for Shiryu later," he said, telepathically, to the others. He got a few noises of agreement. "You did that odd thing again, didn't you?" the man asked, catching them all off guard. Mew was the first to think of something to say to Kakashi. "We'll explain later. Now is not the time," he replied, and Kakashi stared at him, not sure of what to do at this point. He could just leave them, meaning that they could wind up caught by Orochimaru. He could try killing them, but after what they did to Sasuke he doubted that his students would be much help, leaving him with very bad odds. Or he could lead them to Konoha and make them explain once they were within sight of the place. He decided on the last choice, seeing as how they had not shown any inclination that they were going to bolt, or that they could be any type of enemy shinobi. After all, he had found Mew looking confused as to where they were. So, that meant that they probably only wanted to keep a few secrets until they knew that his group could be trusted. Kakashi sighed, and simply jumped back into the trees, as the others took this as a sign to continue following. Still, as they made their way to Konoha it made Kakashi wonder, what type of secrets were they hiding? Guy landed in front of the gates, still holding the boy, and walked past the two guards. Walked being too light a term, seeing as how Guy was moving at a clip normal people would consider a run. "Oi, Guy, what are you doing?" one of them yelled, as he saw what he was carrying. Guy sighed, and tried to keep from shouting. That would be bad, and not just because it would cause a scene. A scene would slow him down, and his shouting would probably wake the boy up, and then they would be back at square one with the boy trying to thrash his way out of Guy's grip. The boy needs to get to the hospital, before he dies preferably. Guy responded, as close to a snarl as he ever got. What the hell was wrong with these people? He turned back to the way he was going as the guard sat down quite abruptly. That left Guy to dash towards the hospital. His cell following behind him. He had forgotten to dismiss them. And he bet that they were also following out of curiosity. Guy-sensei? Is he really hurt that badly? Only Neji's Jukin hit him, Lee said, as they followed behind him. Neji looked almost apologetic? That was a new one. Then again, he had toned down after the exams. I don't think it was any fault of our own, Guy replied, as the hospital came into view. Guy only slowed enough so he wouldn't make a scene crashing through the doors. That would not help matters at all. He slid to a halt, and marched up to the desk. "Nurse, this boy needs attention. Tell the Hokage that I will take responsibility for him. Please just treat him, Guy said, and forestalled the nurse's arguments on treating an unknown. She bit her lip and nodded, before leading them, including Neji, Tenten and Lee, to a room. Lay him down on that bed, and I'll check him over. Now out. I can deal with this, she said, shooing the team out of the room. Guy-sensei, will he be okay? Lee asked, as Guy sat down outside the room. Tenten and Neji had copied him, but Lee was pacing. He was a good person, always caring about those who he fought, even if they were his enemy. But this was even worse. This young man wasn't even an enemy shinobi, and somehow they had landed him in the hospital. Needless to say, Lee's conscience was nagging him. We did what we could, Guy responded, not having much more to say. Tenten looked up to Lee and shook her head. Lee, sit down. Wearing yourself out is not going to help him. If he lives, you can tell him you are sorry once we can see him, she said, and Lee sighed. She was right about that, and he flopped down on the chair with a graceless plop. Guy stood up as he saw the nurse hurry out of the room, but before he could as so much as open his mouth, she had disappeared around the corner and was gone. He looked back to his students to see that they were also watching the hall the nurse had dashed down. After a few moments they looked at each other, wondering what had happened. Then they heard the familiar click of heels come down the hall. Hokage-sama, is it really that bad? Guy asked, as Tsunade came into view. She looked over to them and sighed, as the nurse went in ahead of her. Guy, I'll tell you later, she responded, as she entered the room, and closed the door with finality. Guy sat back down with a sigh. After a while the door opened, and Tsunade came out looking relieved. Guy and his students shot to their feet. Tsunade-sama, is he okay? Guy asked, as he scrambled to his feet. She looked over to them, and nodded. Yes, he will be fine, but leave one of your students behind to watch him. You did say you would take responsibility for him, Tsunade said. Guy nodded, before walking into the room. The boy was laid out on the bed, with about half a dozen wires and tubes attached to him. His long dark hair was arranged around him, and his eyes were closed. His breathing had leveled out, and some color had returned to his face. The steady beep of the monitors showed that he was recovering, and was likely to wake up soon. Neji, you stay here with him. When he wakes up, ask him his name and why he's here, Guy said, pointing over at the Hyuga. He knew that the Hyuga was one of the more reliable for this situation. Neji blinked, but nodded as he sat down next to the bed to wait for the boy to wake up. Where am I? What happened? Oh, right, Shiryu thought, as his mind caught up with him. He remembered falling to his hands and knees, coughing up blood. Then a man that looked like an older version of one of the ones that attacked him had grabbed him, and then what? He couldn't remember. It was too hard to even get his mind to think, it was running much too slowly. He felt hands on him, around his shoulder and arms, and then what pain he had been feeling faded. He guessed he was in a hospital, seeing as how the pain was going away. But why would the people who attacked him bring him to a hospital? They seemed pretty intent on killing him from what he remembered. After the hands left, he heard a voice in the room. He couldn't quite place it, but he was too tired to care. He could tell it was familiar, the Cosmo he recognized. To some extent, there were 3 others as well. 4 people nearby total, though none resembled the Gold Saints. After a few moments he noticed that one had seated itself nearby, and the others were leaving. He couldn't tell who was seated, but he had a feeling that it was the long-haired one. Neji was it? The only one, out of the 3, that landed a hit on him. He groaned lightly as he opened his eyes, only to close them again in a hurry. Figures he would be staring up at the ceiling and into the light. He turned his head to the side and opened them again to see that he had been right about the person, as he was greeted with the sight of the brunette staring him down. You're up, he said, and Shiryu blinked, wondering what was going on. You're up, Neji said, and sighed mentally when the boy only blinked. What was wrong with him? He was startled when the person attempted to sit up though. Lay back down, he ordered, as he got up and pushed the other back down. The darker-haired person scowled up at him, but let himself get pushed back down onto the bed. Neji sighed and sat back down, and studied the person, while the other seemed to be off in his own mind. He took on all 3 of us at one time, and he may have done more damage if he hadn't collapsed from that condition. Tsunade-sama said it was something to do with his heart. I'd like to know what type of training he went through, Neji thought, as he noticed more than a few scars scattered on the person's body. But before he could get any more lost in thought, he remembered what Guy had told him to do. "Who are you?" he asked, startling the boy out of his thoughts. He turned to him and stared before answering. "I'm Shiryu," he responded, and Neji raised an eyebrow. "No family name? Was he an orphan? Not unheard of, but he should at least know the family name, even Naruto knew his." He blinked as he noticed that Shiryu was still looking at him, obviously waiting for an introduction. "Hyuga, Neji. I'm supposed to watch over you." Neji responded, and was a bit startled when Shiryu laughed. "You mean the 4 others outside the window aren't enough?" the boy responded, startling Neji. 4 others? He activated his Kekkei Genkei and almost swore. "Anbu?" "Yes, 4 Anbu," and all looked startled at the fact that they had been picked out so quickly by a person who had just woken up. How had that been possible? "Just tell them to come in, Hyuga-san. I'm sure they would like to know how I picked them out, if your body language is the same as theirs." Shiryu commented. "Just tell them to come in, Hyuga-san. I'm sure they would like to know how I picked them out, if your body language is the same as theirs." Shiryu commented. He was staring back up at the ceiling, away from the light, as he tried not to laugh. Yes, he had spent too much time with Roshi, as it seemed he had gotten better at picking up on body language, and it seemed that being blind for a period of time obviously helped hone the instinct on picking out Cosmos. He heard Neji go to the window and open it, and he closed his eyes. He needed to think, and fast. He didn't know how he was going to explain, but he knew they would want answers. And if he didn't give good ones, he could already feel the hostility coming from them. And he was exhausted. It had taken most of his Cosmo to use Excalibur and keep him alive after his condition decided to rear its head. He felt 4 other Cosmos land in the room, and turned his head, and opened his eyes so he was looking at them. They didn't look too happy, if their stances were an indication of anything. "I suppose you aren't used to being picked out like that," he finally said after a period of silence. He heard Neji sigh. Maybe Roshi's lack of tact had also rubbed off. "Are we there now, people?" Milo asked for the 100th time. Saga twitched, Shira growled, Ioria cracked his knuckles, Camus sighed, and Mew and Shaka shared a glance and shook their heads. Up in the branches Naruto was twitching like mad, as was Sakura, and Sasuke was giving off waves of killing intent. "Stop being so impatient," Kakashi admonished from the trees. Milo sighed, and tried to keep from asking again, as he noticed the others looked extremely annoyed with him. He was sure the ones in the trees wanted to kill him. Oh well, he was kinda used to having someone out for his blood. Nothing new. He could think of a few times where his fellow Gold Saints had tried to murder him because of his tendencies. Though he was thinking of a few ways to mess with the new people. Well, it shouldn't be too hard if they were so easily annoyed with his constant questions. Finally the group in the trees began to slow, and eventually they jumped to the ground. That was about when Kakashi turned to regard the people who he had brought with him. "Well, I know your names, you know ours. But how the hell did you find us in the trees?" he asked, finally letting curiosity take over. He noticed the group looking at each other, as if they were discussing something. And he had the suspicion that he was correct. "Well, we know about your chakra signatures, and how you hide them, well, more like he does." At this Ioria jabbed a thumb in Emu's direction before continuing. "But you see we use a different version of chakra, and it's harder to control, so suppressing it is a harder thing to do than hiding a chakra signature. That signature is the one we track." As the Leo Saint finished, Kakashi tried to figure out if he had been lying. The young teen seemed honest enough, but looks could be deceiving. People could learn how to master body language. Still, he was sure that they had no ill will towards Konoha, as they seemed completely lost when he had found them. With that firmly in mind, he turned towards the gates of Konoha and proceeded to lead them into the city. "Did I say something wrong?" Shiryu thought as he noticed the looks exchanged between the Anbu, as they were called, and Neji. Had he just gotten Hyuga-san in trouble? If so, he would have to apologize later. Neji sighed, and the Anbu in front turned his attention to Shiryu. Shiryu blinked, as the person seemed to be watching him closely as he began speaking. "First question, how did you pick us out? Second, what are you doing here? Third, where are you from?" the Anbu asked, folding his arms and staring down at the injured boy. Sometimes it did help to have a height advantage over the person one was in terror, questioning. Shiryu blinked and almost laughed aloud. They really wanted to know how he had picked them out. Usually people asked the question that was nagging them the most first. Your Cosmo, I can tell you are probably dampening something else, but I don't look for that. It's pretty hard to control, so dampening it is pretty hard, so not many do that. Second question, I have no idea how I ended up here. Last I remember I was fighting him and his friends. With that Shiryu nodded over to Neji before continuing on. And I overdid it. Third, well, not from around here. I don't know what happened to where I came from, as it is probably in shambles by now. I don't even know what happened to my friends, the last he muttered softly, and even the Anbu had difficulty hearing him. Neji blinked as he picked up the last bit of what was said, and that was because he was by the bed. He hadn't expected that, though that would explain why he attacked. If his village had been attacked and destroyed, then he was probably on the lookout for anything that was going to attack him. It did make sense, to a certain extent. Well, he really couldn't blame him. He didn't know what happened to his friends, and didn't know if he was going to be attacked. That would make anyone hair-triggered. Still, he could be acting. Neji glanced up as he saw the Anbu leave. Well, 2 of them at least. Must have sent them to the Hokages, he thought, as he looked back to the boy, who was currently still answering questions from the Anbu that had remained. After a few more questions they left, possibly to report what they had learned to Tsunade. Neji was wondering why the boy seemed so calm. After all, hadn't his village been attacked? He decided to ask, why do you act like you don't care about your village? Neji asked, and Shiryu looked over to him, blinking sleepily. It seemed that what energy the boy had faded quite quickly in the light of Anbu questioning. Well, I trust the others to take care of it. I am one of many. They have been able to handle problems without me. Besides, it's only a place, and I trust them not to get killed. He responded, before looking back to the ceiling and closing his eyes. Neji inclined his head, slightly, to one side. So, this person was completely sure of his comrade's powers and abilities. Neji was just settling back down, when Shiryu sat bolt upright and startled him. What is it? Neji snapped, before he noticed that he was looking out the window. My friends. They are nearby. And with that Shiryu made as if to get up from the bed, and was only halted when Neji pressed 2 fingers to his throat. Shiryu froze, remembering what had happened the last time that boy's hands connected with him. Lay back down. You are in no condition to get up, and I was charged with watching you. Neji said, in a deadly quiet voice, and Shiryu lowered himself back onto the bed. But they probably think I'm dead. I can't tell them otherwise laying here in bed. I'm too drained to give them anything to track. Shiryu pressed, from the bed. Neji twitched, mentally. He knew one of 2 things would happen if he said, nope, to him. 1. He gives up and leaves it alone, or 2. He continues asking. Now Neji could have gone and told them himself if it weren't for a few problems. For starters, he didn't know what the hell they looked like. Next was the fact that he was guarding the boy, and leaving would be considered shrieking his duty. And taking him along was not an option, as he still looked too tired to move. No, stay in bed. If they are your friends they will find you. They wouldn't have given up so easily. Neji said, and blinked when the young man winced. Did I say something wrong? No, stay in bed. If they are your friends they will find you. They wouldn't have given up so easily. Neji said, and Shiryu winced. It was true, they should be able to find them, but what hurt more was the fact that his friends, his brothers were in a whole different world, and would never stop looking for him or the others. They wouldn't believe they had died, not without bodies as proof. Hell, the last time it looked like he had died Shira had covered him in his own gold cloth and saved him, and then Hades? They traveled to the realm of the dead, and made it back to the realm of the living, all of them. Just that, he and the 7 golds had been sent to a different one. The only proof that they were dead would be bodies. Dead, motionless, cosmoless, bodies that stayed that way. Until then they would continue to look for them until they were told to stop, made to stop, or just died after the years. Had he and the other 7 just sentenced the others to a life of searching for what couldn't be found? If so, if they had, then he felt terrible. He closed his eyes and tried to stop the tears as he thought of what had been lost, and what he and the others had done to their friends back at Sanctuary, if it was still standing. While they had beaten Hades, he did not know if the Greek gods had decided to punish his brothers and the rest of the golds for attacking a god. That thought merely brought a new wave of depression crashing down on him. He brought his formerly useless arm up and covered his eyes before his guard could see his tears. What he didn't catch, with his eyes closed, was the concerned look Neji gave him. Neji really hadn't thought that comment would have that much of an impact. He didn't think it would make him that upset. He had said that only to deter him from getting up again, and because if they really were friends they should still be looking for the young teen. He hadn't meant for it to hurt, now he was at a loss of what to do. What could he say now that wouldn't make matters worse? He was never known for being good in these situations. He jumped slightly when the door opened, and Tsunade came in. And it turned out Neji had been right, as he saw the same Anbu that had been in the room behind her. Tsunade gave Neji an odd look when she saw the patient with an arm flung over his eyes, and the few tears that had escaped trailing down his face. Neji shrugged, not really knowing what to say in this type of situation. Well, he should be well enough to leave tomorrow. Since we can't find any family, friends, or records on him, I'm assigning you to look after him. You meaning the Hyuga. And before you ask, it is not because you are in the room. Tsunade said, after a pause in which she checked over the young teen's health report again. Though at her mention of not finding any records, family, or friends of his there was a small sob from the bed, and she glanced over to see that the young teen was still awake. They haven't shown up yet? Shiryu managed to ask, as they looked over to him. His eyes were uncovered, and he looked like he was still trying to hold back tears. Tsunade was doing her best to not go over there and hug him to make him stop crying, seeing as how this could all be an act, but it was damned hard. No one has come in looking for anyone with your name. You will be staying with the Hyuga. It hurt to say that, and even more so to say it like she didn't care. The teen nodded, half aware, and closed his eyes again, and Tsunade could tell he was going back to sleep, or at least trying to. She sighed, and signaled the Anbu to leave, and she followed them from the room. Neji remained, and was wondering what type of bond this teen had with his friends that it would make him break down at the mention that none were coming for him. Kakashi led them towards the tower, to speak with Tsunade. He knew that this was definitely against protocol, but when had he ever been one for that? They were looking for their friend, but it seemed that over the journey that they were becoming less sure that he was alive. They didn't even bother to ask the guards what they meant when they muttered something about another bunch of weirdos. Did that mean they had given up? He glanced behind him to see that Mew had a decidedly depressed look to him, as did a few others. The ones that didn't look upset looked spaced out. Kakashi sighed, as he knew the feeling of losing a close teammate and friend all too well. He walked right up to the tower, and entered, and ushered the rest of the group, and his cell, into the tower. He made his way to the Hokage's room, and opened the door to find that Tsunade was up and actually doing work for a change. He blinked a few times, startled enough that he didn't hear his Hokage asking him what he was there for until she repeated her question louder, and pitched a sake bottle at him. Eh? Oh, right. I found these 7, and they say that they have lost their home. I think they would be of use if proven trustworthy. Kakashi said, and made a small movement that told Tsunade he wanted to talk more about this once the genin and newcomers were out of earshot. She nodded and stood. Right. Naruto, show them to the apartment complex you live at. Here, she handed him a hastily scrawled note, and signed it, the note saying that the 7 were under her care for now. This should keep them off your case, she said, and shooed them out of the room. As soon as they were gone, Kakashi turned back to Tsunade, with no trace of his usual lazy attitude. As I was saying about them, there is more than meets the eye, and he filled her in on the recent events and what he suspected. Naruto waved to his 2 teammates as they left, and he proceeded walking off in another direction. Though for some reason the Saints couldn't relax, no matter how chatty they were with Naruto. It was just something in the air, something that made them glance around every so often. Mew, do you feel that? Ioria asked, and Mew closed his eyes for a second. Yes, I feel hatred, anger, and malice. I don't know who it's coming from, but it seems to be coming from more than one person. Mew said, as he opened his eyes, and watched Milo talking quite energetically to Naruto. So, more than one? But who is it directed at? Shaka asked, following behind the other blonde, his eyes still closed. Mew paused for a second before following a strand of malice to one of the minds. He almost reeled back as he felt what the man was thinking. Mew, are you alright? Shaka asked, when the Aries Saint didn't respond. Mew steadied his mind before answering. I'm fine. But, a man, selling fruit, his anger, no his rage was all directed at our guide, he replied, and Shaka responded with mild surprise. Even Milo paused for a second in his chatter. Mew had made sure the others could hear him. Saga turned his head slightly so he was looking back at the fruit vendor, and glared when he caught the man glaring in their direction. He turned back around with a sour look on his face. As they continued walking they noticed more and more glares, and it was getting under their skin. Even Mew was getting irritated. When people began tossing things though, that was the last straw. A stone flew, aimed at Naruto's head, but Milo snatched it out of the air and crushed it. He turned to the person who tossed it, glaring fit to kill a god, and snarled. "If you want to pick on him so badly then come on. I'll beat you so badly that not even your parents will recognize when I'm finished." He snarled, and was rewarded when many of the villagers moved off. Naruto turned back to Milo and placed a hand on his arm. "It's okay. Really, it is. I've dealt with it forever, so nothing new," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Milo growled. "Well, that doesn't mean we'll let them keep it up." He snapped and crossed his arms. Naruto smiled brightly, and turned back around to leading them to the apartments. "They dropped me that easily? No, they couldn't have. But why haven't they come looking? Why didn't they ask? They are in this village, they entered, so why? Do they really think I'm dead? But they don't even have proof I am." Shiryu's thoughts went something like this for the remainder of the day, and far into the night. He couldn't sleep, as his stomach was twisted into one too many knots to allow that. When he finally fell asleep it was anything but restful. Morning came, and Shiryu woke to hear voices, and opened his eyes to see Tsunade, a man he didn't know, and Neji, all by the door to the room. "Hiyashi, now listen to me. Neji was assigned to watch him by his cell leader, so that should settle it. Or should I let another clan handle it because you can't?" he heard Tsunade say, baiting the man. He could tell that Hiyashi knew he was being baited, but there was the reputation. "Fine, but that means he's going to be close to the main branch quarters because that's where Neji lives," he stated, and Shiryu picked up an undertone of worry in the man's Cosmo. So, having an unknown person close to him, or family, worried the man. Not as heartless as he sounded then. "Hiyashi, you know that precautions have been made. Besides, I doubt he'll be much of a threat in that state. He may be well enough to leave, but not enough to do any type of damage to your family." How true was that? He was sure it was going to be a few weeks before he could even think of using even his most basic attack, let alone Excalibur again. How he had pulled it off in the forest he had no idea, then again it had used up a good portion of his Cosmo. As he tried to sit up, he noticed he had drawn the attention of the three in the room. "Hyuga-san? Is that your father?" he asked, pointing to the man that looked like some type of relative. He noticed both Neji and Hiyashi winced, and a dejected Cosmo suddenly flooded from the younger brunette. Even Tsunade looked uncomfortable. He had stepped on a landmine. "My father is dead," the brunette replied, and Shiryu blinked, before catching on to the huge mistake he had made. I'm sorry, he just looks like you somewhat," he said, sinking down into the bed. His comment only made matters worse. Neji looked down to the floor, and Hiyashi looked anywhere but at Neji. "He's my uncle, he and my father were twins," Neji said in a soft voice. Now Shiryu winced, and lowered his head. I'm so sorry, I'll stop talking now," he muttered, before he could say anything else to make matters worse than before. "Idiot. Shunri told me I was never good with words. Why did I have to say that?" he thought, as he watched the others in the room try to gather back their thoughts. He began to twist the covers, fraying them as they continued talking. Neji sighed. The memory still hurt, and that idiot had to bring it up. Though, he really had no idea about it, so he couldn't be blamed much. He glanced over to him once or twice as his uncle and Tsunade tried to come to a decision on how he would be handled. Normally this would have been taken care of at the Hokage's tower, but it seemed that Tsunade was taking a day off. Neji finally noticed that the covers were fraying, sighed, stalked over to the bed, and yanked the covers out of the boy's hands. Said dark-haired boy looked up at him in surprise. "The hospital personnel are the last people you want to anger. Do not fray the sheets," he admonished, and received an awkward nod. What neither noticed was Tsunade and Hiyashi had stopped talking long enough to see that. Tsunade smirked, and Hiyashi sighed. "Well then, it's settled. Neji will be responsible for Shiryu's actions until it is proven that he is trustworthy. That means you have to take him with you to keep track of him. That is until the council, and I feel he is no longer a threat, or likely to be one." Now, Hiyashi has agreed to let him stay in one of the guest rooms, though it is closer to you. Like I said, you will be keeping an eye on him. If he causes trouble, the blame falls on you. Don't think you have been forgotten, Shiryu. If you cause too much trouble or break any laws here, you will be punished accordingly. And I hope you have enough moral to not want to get another in trouble because of your actions. Tsunade said, and gave them both a stern look before leaving the room. Hiyashi sighed, again. Well, Neji, get him up. I still have a few things to attend to. Hiyashi said, as he looked Shiryu over. Neji helped the dark-haired teen to his feet, and waited until he was sure he had his balance back. Then they began walking off towards the Hyuga compound. Shiryu glanced around the room assigned to him, as Neji explained how things were run in the complex. He, for his part, was paying attention, and looking around at the same time. He refrained from asking any questions though, as he got the distinct feeling that this was already pushing the patience of the Hyuga. Were you listening? Said Hyuga asked, the coldness in his tone making Shiryu think that Neji was not fond of his current mission at all. Well, maybe he was being a little too optimistic with not fond, but he didn't want to be rude. Yes, I was. Just thinking, that's all. He responded, looking back to his guide for the time being. Neji snorted, and turned back around and pointed to one door. My room. To the left of mine is yours. At the end is the bathroom. The other rooms are guest rooms, and are empty. The private rooms of the main branch are down a few more halls, in a different wing of the house. And if you were not paying attention, this is the guest wing. He added the last part to get Shiryu's attention again, who was looking at a few hanging paintings. The dragon jumped and rubbed the back of his neck in embarrassment. Neji sighed in frustration. Sorry. Shiryu apologized, making the white-eyed male sigh again. He seemed to be doing that frequently around him. Come on. I have to train now, and my cell leader doesn't like us being late. And with the sudden announcement, the Hyuga turned, literally on his heel, and walked back the way he came, navigating the place as if he grew up in the main house, rather than just being invited. Red. Ordered, to stay in the guest quarters of said building. Shiryu hastened to catch up, not wanting to get lost. Wait, I'm coming along? He asked, as he fell into step behind the shorter male. Neji didn't even pause for a second when it came to the retort. I cannot leave you here. That should be answer enough. He responded automatically, the unspoken, I am your warden. And I still do not trust you, clearly and unmistakably there. Oh, was all Shiryu said, lowering his head. The, I'm sorry you still feel that weight was left unsaid as they left the complex. Wow, this place is empty? Milo had commented, as he had done his best to ignore the scrawled graffiti along the walls. He had taken enough Japanese from Athena to communicate with Seiya and his group when they slipped back into that language on accident. They all knew Greek and Japanese as precaution, and the words written on the wall were not at all flattering. Scorpio had then made a mental note to kill, or at least maim, the people responsible for the words. And he had not been alone in his ideas. But that had been when they had seen the place for the first time, and Naruto once again laughed it off as if it were nothing. That only served to make some of them angrier. Gods and goddess help whoever crossed the Scorpion Saint next. And that person happened to be Naruto, as he banged loudly on the door to the apartment that Camus, Milo, and Saga were sharing. Miu, Ioria, Shira, and Shaka were in another, a few doors down. Wake up, come on. You asked to be introduced to my team properly yesterday, and I need to get going for training. Wake up, and the banging got louder, as Naruto continued to hammer on the door mercilessly. Milo groaned and pulled the blankets over his head, as he tried to go back to sleep, even as Camus grumbled muted death threats in Russian. Milo was not having too hard of a time getting back to sleep, so he could forgive the blonde. Camus, however, was a lighter sleeper and did not appreciate being woken so abruptly nor in such a fashion. Not a good combo for the man-turned-teen sleeping beside him. The temperature had dropped almost 30 degrees within a second, even as Camus buried his head into the pillow in a futile effort to ignore the blonde and remain asleep. Futile because Naruto was now singing in a very off-key voice and both Scorpio and Aquarius were beginning to wonder how Gemini remained asleep. Get him before I kill you, Camus growled. Milo sat up abruptly and stared at his bedmate in shock. Kill me, what the hell did I do? He squawked, flailing the arm that he was not using to prop himself up with. Get him, now. A low growl came from the couch, making both Camus and Milo turn to see Saga sitting up and glowering at them both. Camus buried himself back into the blankets and pillow, as Milo got to his feet. Ah, ha 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 ha, right. The scorpion rubbed the back of his head, as he dragged himself out of his bed at the insistence of Camus and Saga. The blonde runt dies, Milo thought, and walked over to the door and yanked it open. Finally, you guys, sleep, like, logs? Ah, good morning? Naruto smiled nervously up at the elder teen, who was giving off a really annoyed vibe not unlike a diluted form of killing intent that many stronger shinobi were capable of producing. I have frostbite now, thank you. I'm up, but Camus and Saga are out. Time to go wake the other group. And no loud banging. Mew may be a pacifist, but the other three are not. Milo growled, combing his fingers through his navy blue hair. He was still dressed in the clothing he had worn the day before, seeing how they had no change of clothing yet. All right, got it, very temperamental people in the next group, Naruto replied, as he followed behind Milo. As soon as they reached the door to the other Gold's apartment, Milo gave it a swift kick, much louder than Naruto's banging. If they had been able to sleep through Naruto's antics, this would have woken them. And boy did it ever. The door opened slowly to reveal Shaka, who did not look at all ruffled from the rude morning call, who smiled sweetly at Milo and asked him quite pleasantly, "What do you want?" Milo backed up several paces. We were going to meet Naruto's team properly today, don't kill the messenger." The last was spat out in a rush as he covered his head with his arms in fear. Shaka was glaring at him, with his eyes open. Him, not being a morning person, was an understatement. "Shaka, please calm down." Naruto did say it was early in the morning. A calm voice floated from somewhere in the bedroom where the others were sleeping. A few moments later Mew came into view. Milo could have kissed the Jamirian, but did not want to risk anything like that near an already touchy Shaka. He still did not know if those two were going out and did not want to find out by trying something of the sort and getting blasted by either one. Nope, that would not be fun at all. I do not appreciate the way he chose to wake us. Shaka growled, but closed his eyes anyways. This is Milo we are talking about, Mew pointed out, earning an indignant, "Hey," from Milo. "Guys, I'm going to be late." Naruto piped up, even though he found watching them entertaining. But he remembered Sakura, and really did not want to be late. "Right then, come on Shaka, Milo, we don't want him to be late," Mew said, as he led Shaka out of the door and closed it behind himself, much to the confusion of Milo and Naruto. "The others?" Milo asked, and Mew shook his head slowly. "Want to behead you for the wake-up call," he replied, making Milo shudder at exactly who he knew would phrase it that way. Shiro was never up before 12, and this was hours before he was even reasonably people-friendly. "Ah, okay then, we leave them to sleep," Milo said, as he and the other followed after Naruto. When they arrived at the meeting point, on a bridge, there were only two others in sight. The dark-haired boy and the pink-haired girl. The silver-haired man was nowhere to be seen. Naruto sighed and shook his head. "Kaka-sensei is late again," he grumbled, but received a hard knock on the head from the pink kid, and a snort from the dark-haired boy. Mew raised his equivalent of an eyebrow at the girl's behavior, but brushed it off as some type of bonding between them. Milo chuckled, earning a glare from the blonde. Milo only shrugged, he was used to being glared at by now. Shaka chose to wisely ignore the small commotion, and was simply scanning the surrounding areas for the silver-haired man. Now what was his name again? He could remember Sakura's because most of Naruto's chatter on the way to the apartments had been about three things: ramen, becoming Hokage, and Sakura. "Yo, sorry I'm late, I got lost on the road of life." And there was the silver-haired man, sitting on the railing of the bridge, one hand raised in greeting. "Liar," two voices screeched, one male and the other female. Naruto and Sakura respectively. Of course the loud noise got the attention of the saints present, as they stared at the way the two yelled at their teacher. They had never done such a thing while they were being trained. But Kakashi only rubbed the back of his neck, and grinned in his fashion, before pointing at the three saints. "Oi, what are you three doing here?" he asked, wondering how and why they had thought to seek them out. "Naruto," was the only response from all three, and Kakashi sighed. It figured the blonde would have had something to do with them being there. As soon as anyone showed the barest hints of being friendly to him over Sasuke, he was head over heels. He had never had too many friends, so as soon as he got any, or it looked like they could be friends, he dragged them around everywhere. Regardless of what his teacher said. Ah, that would explain. Well then, I suppose you want to see how we train? Kakashi asked, but Milo shook his head. Not really. Proper introductions come first. I have the nagging feeling we really didn't start off on the right foot and all, he replied, after glancing at the other two. Oh, speaking of that, Sasuke, Shira said, sorry about any injuries you sustained when you fell from the tree. Mew put in, making Naruto snicker as he and the rest of them remembered how they had found Sasuke. The Uchiha said nothing, as he had been trying to rid his mind of that memory. That humiliating memory. Naruto's laughter was not helping. He smirked inwardly when he heard Sakura knock Naruto upside the head again. Well, I guess that would be best. Guests first, Kakashi replied, after Naruto stopped whining about Sakura's temper and abuse. Milo shrugged. Hell, they had been the ones to ask, and they were the ones who had imposed on their hospitality. Well, I'm Scorpio, Milo. Nice to meet you. The blue-haired man started the introductions. Virgo, Shaka. The blonde saint was not in the mood to do too much talking, and simply stated his name and leaving it at that. Aries, Mew. Sorry again for the trouble we may have caused. Mew finished, once again apologizing for the recent events, playing the role of peacemaker once again. It seemed to have become his unassigned role since becoming a saint, and by the gods some of the tempers he had to deal with while they had been training. Uchiha, Sasuke. Sasuke was the first to respond, after being nudged in the ribs by the Junin. Said Junin acted as if he had done nothing to the last of the Uchiha when the boy glared at him. Haruno, Sakura. The Pinkett piped up next, quickly adding her name after Sasuke's. Hitaki, Kakashi. The Junin was next, and thought he was last since they had to know the blonde who had dragged them out there in the first place, but Naruto had other ideas. Uzumaki, Naruto. The next Hokage. Naruto grinned widely, forgetting one thing. We already know you, Shaka stated, earning a nervous chuckle from Naruto and a few snickers from the collective group. Right, introductions over, so we're off to train. Training Field 5U3. And with that Kakashi was gone. Not soon after the three shinobi had taken off as well, each trying to beat the other to the field. The saints looked between each other, shrugged, and took off after them. Kakashi hadn't exactly told them they couldn't follow. Where are we supposed to meet them again? Shiryu asked, as he looked around at the various shops lining the roads that led to the training fields. Neji sighed, and pinched the bridge of his nose. How could someone his own age be so distractible was beyond him. Then again he never figured out Lee. Training Field 5. Pay attention, I do not like repeating myself. He growled, making Dragon flinch. Ah, I remembered that, but you have training fields? He asked, wondering how he always seemed to rub the Hyuga the wrong way. He was trying to be polite. I did say, training field, did I not? Neji asked, glancing over to the other male. Yes, he slowly nodded, wondering what the other was getting at. There is your answer. And with that Neji turned back to the road, and ignored the Dragon Saint. It wasn't until they were almost settled down to wait for Guy, Tenten, and Lee, that Shiryu said anything else. Actually it was more of an exclamation rather than words, but it still broke the silence. Oh, he exclaimed, scrambling up from his previously seated position. Neji didn't even look in his direction. Now what? He asked, wondering what else his charge could come up with. 3 of my friends are nearby. He looked like he wanted to dart off, but made no move to do so. Neji was beginning to feel a bit of doubt creeping in on his suspicions of him being a threat. He shook the thought away. He was a threat until he proved otherwise. He could be a very good actor. After all, Yakushi had fooled everyone, even the third. Kami-sama, they did not need another one of him. The thought of another spy of his caliber and quality made Neji shudder. No, they were going to have to keep a careful eye on this one. What are they doing coming here? He finally asked, as he got to his feet, brushing himself off. But Shiryu was not looking in that direction anymore, he was staring at the branches of a tree. Neji turned, and caught a flash of silver hair, before Kakashi dropped to the ground. So Guy is using this field too, eh? The Junin asked, and Neji nodded. Kakashi-san, I'm guessing you're the reason 3 of his friends are on their way here. Neji stated, putting the pieces together. While he may not be as fast as Shikamaru would have been with it, he still managed to piece them together. Yes, oh, that must mean you must be Shiryu. The silver-haired man said, pointing at Neji's charge. Shiryu, not knowing how to respond to such an obvious question, resorted to politeness. Yes, I am, he replied, bowing slightly. He didn't notice the raised brows on either one as he did so. Well, this is going to be a surprise for them, Kakashi said, after the small pause. He then glanced to the edge of the field, just as Naruto came crashing through, in a roll. Ha, I beat you, he cried, jumping to his feet and pointing at another boy, who likewise rolled into the clearing. Granted, his roll was not of his own violation, but because something had caught his foot 5 seconds before. Only because you tripped him, a pink-haired female snapped, as she stormed up to the blonde, and gave him a solid whack over his head. The blonde bent over, holding his head and whined. Beat Sakura-chan, he cried, even as the girl went to check on the other male. Even though he was standing and telling her he was perfectly fine. But this was before 3 more shapes hurtled into the clearing. Don't you guys know how to take a straight path? Milo demanded, jabbing a finger in the shinobi's direction. Only Shiryu, Shaka, and Mew knew how dangerous of a gesture that was coming from the scorpion. Was all one of them had to say on the matter. The blonde rubbed the back of his neck, and the girl looked embarrassed, either for her teammates or by her teammates they did not want to ask. Ignoring you too, Milo grumbled, before turning to Kakashi, who looked oddly smug about something. Do golds normally act like this? Shiryu asked, a few seconds after Milo had stopped talking. This got the reaction that both Neji and Kakashi had been expecting. Shocked surprise as they turned to face the dragon, then excitement at finding their friend alive and whole. You're alive, and with that Milo had tackled the dragon to the ground in a tight hug. Shiryu, Mew exclaimed as he was not far behind Milo, and was followed closely by Shaka. The Virgo Saint shook his head as he saw that Milo did not seem to show signs of letting go anytime soon. Milo, I do not think he will be alive for much longer if you keep that up. The long-haired blonde sighed. Oops, was all Milo said, before releasing his death grip on the other saint. I thought you guys stopped trying to kill us. Shiryu gasped, as he straightened himself out. Milo only let out a nervous chuckle at that comment. So you know each other? Neji asked, and Milo canted his head, before pointing at Neji. Who's the chick? Kakashi had to grab the Hyuga before he charged the saint, even as Naruto and Sasuke laughed at the comment. Shiryu stared at Milo, who looked confused as to why the girl was trying to attack him for the remark, before shaking his head. Milo, his name is Hyuga, Neji. Neji is a male, and then is clicked with the Scorpio Saint. Calling a man a woman had never been a good way to begin a relationship at all, but, whoops. My bad, was the only thing he could say. Neji really hated these people. Stop pacing, you're going to wear a rut in the floor. Hyuga snapped, as he shifted in his seat for the umpteenth time in that hour. He got no response. And you're making me kinda sick. Seiya added, making the pacer, Ikki, glare. Then stop watching, was the snapped reply, before he continued his pacing. Shun decided it was time for him to speak up, and hopefully get his brother to stop moving at the very least. Big brother? Pacing won't help Athena find Shiryu and the golds any faster, he said, and the phoenix sighed, and ran a hand through his hair, in defeat. He marched to a seat, and dropped down into it with a soft thump, and glared at the door in front of them. It had been almost 4 hours now since Athena had said she was going to find out what happened to the missing saints, and see if there was some way she could get them back. This was, of course, after they had found out they had gone missing, and were not simply elsewhere in the realm of the living. That had taken a full day to find out, with much scrambling and piecing things together and finding of cloths, taking tally of injuries, bodies, and people. It had been nothing short of chaos. But once it had been found out that there were 8 missing saints, one including a very important bronze, things went even further downhill. Ikki had thrown one of his infamous fits that usually came from someone harming Shun when he heard Shiryu was missing, confirming said little brother's suspicion of with whom Ikki's feelings lay. Seiya had wanted to charge back to the realm of the dead to see if the dragon had gotten lost or stuck. And Roshi had to be hunted down before he broke something important, when he went off to vent his feeling on the matter. Then when it had been said that several golds, and yes the names were announced, were missing as well, Kiki was found sulking in a dark area. Xian had given anyone who talked to him a vacant look that simply said that he was going to need time to get over his pupil vanishing. Marina was still under watch. Kanan was holed up somewhere in his quarters and they had to drag Hyoga out of his sulking area and talk sense into the Russian before he froze the area over. And that was only what happened within the first 10 minutes. In short, things had become nothing short of absolute chaos, with more saints either missing, hiding one way or another, or generally tearing up the training grounds. It had only calmed down once Athena said she was going to speak to her father about the mess. It had been 5 hours now. And the holy saints, I'm calling them that because their clothes are technically holy clothes, so, yeah, we're waiting for some sign that things were drawing to a close, before one or more of them went stir-crazy. Is she done yet? Ikki demanded impatiently, and Hyoga got up, went to the door, stared at it, and then sat back down in his seat. Nope, still in there, he replied, his voice taking a sarcastic edge. Ikki either chose to ignore this, or missed it completely in his anger. I'm going to be an old man by the time she's done, he growled, scowling at the door. The others wondered how the door withstood it without bursting into flames. Big brother, Shun muttered, placing a pacifying hand on his brother's arm again. Ikki cooled his temper, a trifle. He still looked like he was going to murder something. But no sooner did he stand up, along with the other holy saints, did the door swing open to reveal a very worn-out-looking goddess. Athena, what happened? What's going on? Where are they? Are you okay? They all asked at the same time, jumbling the words together as they demanded answers. Athena held up her hand, asking for silence, and just as quickly silence fell. Sit down, I'll explain. Once they were seated once again, she resumed talking again. First off, I was talking to my elder siblings and my parents. It did not go well. Secondly, they were banished too. Before anyone could make a noise, she held up her hand again, forestalling any arguments. They were banished to a different plane of the living realms. And no, I do not know where to, even they did not know where they had been sent. She sighed, and bowed her head. And no, Shun, I am not okay. As she finished she dropped, with all the grace of being a goddess allowed, into a chair and sighed again in frustration. There was dead silence before Seiya decided to cut it. But, they are okay, right? He asked, trying to wring any and all emotion from that statement. He did not want her to hear the desperation in his voice that was echoed in his eyes and the rest of the holy saints. She could still see the despair in their cosmos, had seen it as soon as she had spoken. Was this her punishment for attacking Hades? Hers and her remaining saints? If so, her family could not have picked a crueler one if they had tried. Seiya, I do not know. She responded, and Seiya reacted the way she thought he would, along with the rest of the saints gathered there. But there has to be a way to see if they are okay. Right? Seiya demanded, as Shun gasped. Ikki's jaw tightened and Hyoga glared at the floor. If this was the reaction of the holy saints, she could only guess at the reaction of the golds. But thinking along the lines of cloths, and if they were okay, then their cosmos should still be connected to the cloths, she could send them off to the exiled saints. But if it failed, that would be proof that they had gotten into more trouble than they could have gotten out of. But if it worked, they would be down either a gold cloth or the holy dragon cloth. Did she want to risk trying to send one off to its bearer when either option could result in even more chaos? Athena, is something the matter? Hyoga asked, as he remembered that Shiryu wasn't there to cut through Seiya's ranting and get to the matter at hand. I've decided what I'm going to do. Promise me you four will not react too badly if it does not work, she said, as she got back to her feet, and began walking off towards the chambers that held the cloths of the missing saints. Athena, what do you mean by that? We promise, but what do you mean? Hyoga asked, as the group followed her out, all wondering what she was up to. She shook her head, and continued walking until she reached the doors. Is everything okay? Shun asked quietly, and she let out a slow breath before opening the doors, and walking in. She headed straight for the dragon cloth's box, and placed one hand on it, feeling the controlled power and calm presence. Mew had once remarked on the nature of the clothes, saying how they each had their own tune to them, never the same one, and all always called up the image of the person who was bearing it at the time. If not the image of the person themselves, it was an idea of what the person was like. Not the personality when around people, but what they were like, truly like, when no one else was around. He jokingly said it was the cloth, attuning to the bearer. The tune That dragon gave off made her think of someone who was calm, powerful, disciplined, caring, and oddly playful at times. But also easily saddened. She was sure that he, if any of the exiled saints, was not taking it well. Like the ones left at Sanctuary. The thought of her saints being without her protection, even just a piece of it in the form of a cloth, was torment. She silently begged of her father to let this work, and that Shiryu hadn't died while they had been delayed in putting things back in order. They were still putting things in order, after all it had only been a week, and that was time enough. I am going to attempt something. I will tell you after I am done what it was. But for now just trust me. She implored them, and received a few nods and a grunt of agreement. She took Victory, her staff, from where it had been resting, and holding it in one hand, the other resting lightly on the box of the dragon cloth. She concentrated on letting the cloth find its way to the exiled saint. A few moments later a glow encased the box, and when it dimmed the box, cloth and all, was gone. Athena smiled, and sat down heavily on the ground. And once the other 4 holy saints recovered from their shock they raced up to her. "Athena, what happened?" was the consensus of the voices that called to her as the 4 scrambled to the fallen goddess. "It worked, Shiryu is alive at the least." She smiled a weary smile, but a happy one. She noted that hope sprang back into the cosmos of her saints of hope as soon as she finished speaking. That was good. Hope had always served them well. Hope and love, and right now they held both out to the exiles.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.